Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.
Assalamualaikum, Tun Dr Mahathir. Thank you for your time to talk about my grandfather, Dato Harun. I has been spending the last 3-4 years doing some research about his story. I wasn't born when he was very active politically, mainly driven by his diaries that have appeared in the last few years. And a lot of people might be surprised that the original is actually in English, but my uncle had it translated, I think 1 year ago. So I think we passed a copy to your office recently. So just trying to find as many points of view historically at the time. I've been looking for various different people to talk to. So I think quite miraculous that you can spare some time as well, inshallah, to talk about it. And, you know, I think very relevant as well due to the current cases going on. And my grandfather's name often mentioned together with the current case because of a lot of similarities. But I feel also a lot of differences which have to be recognized as well. So Alhamdulillah, thank you again. What's your immediate kind of memories or recollections about Dato Harun, do you think?
Well, when I was in UMNO in the early days, I looked up to him as a very dynamic leader among the young people. And I was a very strong supporter for him. And in fact, we got on quite well to the extent that when I was expelled from UMNO by Tunku Abdul Rahman, he came to Abdul Rahman with Aziz, I forgot his second name, to persuade me to apologize to Tunku and return to UMNO. Of course, I did not apologize, I did not return, because I stand by what I said. So that was how involved he was with me and my attitude towards him, that he was a good leader, and I expected him to make progress in UMNO.
Okay. Yeah, I read in your memoirs as well that you considered him as, I think you wrote as a friend. And when I read a lot of the biographies of Tunku, of Tun Razak, Tun Hussein, often they will mention the three of you, Dato Harun, yourself, and Tun Razak, as the young Turks of UMNO at the time, especially around the issue that you wrote your article about Tunku, you know, in the early days before you were expelled. So yeah, I read quite a lot about that. So what was it about him that was dynamic or that was effective, do you think, at the time as a leader in UMNO?
Well, there were not many leaders in those days. He was among the prominent people in UMNO whose activities are quite well known and who expressed his opinions on a lot of things, to the point where I think Tun Razak felt threatened by him. I think Tun Razak worries that he would challenge Tun Razak. So because of that, I think there was this distance between him and Tun Razak. And when he became more and more popular among the younger people, this worries Tun Razak even more. So then came the Joe Wagner fight, and a lot of things were said about this. I didn't follow, I didn't attend I didn't see the fight at all. I didn't follow because I was not interested in boxing. But later on, I was told that there was some money loss, and there was accusation that Dato Harun has been involved in some wrongdoings.
Mm.
So I must admit I knew very little about it. But obviously, Tun Razak wanted to take a case against him.
Yeah. So I will hopefully we'll get on to that in a few minutes time. But when I was speaking to his political secretary, Dato Fahmi Ibrahim, was very prominent in Pemuda UMNO that time. Of course, my uncle, Dato Mazlan, as well, very involved politically. So they mentioned about the kind of rift between him and Tun Razak at a certain point. They said they were very close to begin with, actually. And one of the factors that they brought up was this idea of the three Abduls or the three Dollars, Dollar Ismail, Dollar Ahmad, and one more, I forgot his name. But whether there was some element of communist kind of involvement trying to drive a wedge between the two. So did you have any ideas or recollections about that?
Well, at that time, everything is blame on the communists. If you want to say somebody is bad, you say he is involved with communists, or he is communist, or he is interested in communism. This was Tunku. The Tunku blamed everything on the communists. And Tun Razak also had the same tendency that any problem that he has, it must be plots by the communists. But actually, there were no such plots. These were local politics about people who want to get a place for themselves.
Okay. Although those three Abduls did, I think they admitted on TV or interview that they had certain communist leanings. But I won't kind of press too much about that. We'll move on to the Muhammad Ali fight. At the time, did you think it was I think in your memoirs you wrote that maybe it was a miscalculation on Dato Harun's part. Maybe he was trying to push himself further up politically, which is a fair view of the atmosphere at the time. Do you still think that was the case?
Yeah, I never thought that Dr. Harun has a chance because he was mainly involved in state of Selangor politics, not in federal politics. But there was this suspicion that he has ambition to displace Tun Razak. But that was the suspicion only. I didn't believe it. I didn't think of him trying to oust Tun Razak. Besides, in those days, it was not all that fierce. Most of the things were happening very quietly underground.
Okay, and what did you think about the boxing fight in general?
Well, I thought
Any particular thoughts? Did you think it was good for Malaysia?
this boxing started off with one fight in Africa. After that African fight, I think Dato Harun or somebody around him decided that it would be a good thing to bring this pair to Malaysia, to see them fight in Malaysia, because it will gain for us a lot of publicity. And we felt that Malaysians would be interested. So that was why this idea came that we should have this fight in Malaysia. I was not involved at all. I was, at that moment, I was not very prominent among them, excepting that I knew most of the people around Tun Razak, Abdullah Ahmad and Akash Khalil. Akasha and all that. I knew them. I knew they were very close to Tun Razak, but I myself was not that close. Razak knew me, but I wasn't in the group of young people who seemed to have easy access to Tun Razak.
Okay. And of course, the fight then went ahead. There was a lot of, I managed to get video footage, pictures of, the Malaysia at the time, thousands of people at the airport. And by coincidence, the town that I'm working in is where Joe Bugner is from in the UK, just by coincidence. But of course, the fight itself wasn't well attended. There wasn't a lot of people in the stadium, I think, on the day. And when my grandfather writes in his diaries about the fight, often he will write with regret, because that was the moment when things started to go downhill for him, or he felt that a lot of political maneuvering was started after that fight. Of course, two things. One is the Bank Rakyat kind of funding to do with the fight, which he was charged with. And number two was Hong Kong Shanghai Bank to do with a piece of land and sum of money, 250,000 ringgit, that he took on behalf of Pemuda UMNO. He didn't benefit from it personally, but in the end, those were the two cases that they charged him with. And I also read in your memoirs, and I'll quote it, that you said, "I thought Tun Hussein would act strategically and garner political goodwill by not proceeding with legal action against Dato Harun," because obviously Tun Razak had passed away by that time. "Thinking that he would at least be open to the idea, I met with him and suggested dropping the case. Strictly speaking, it should have been the Attorney General's decision, but the truth was the entire case was political." So what made you say that it was entirely political? What's your take on that?
I thought that this action against Dato Harun was more political because of the possibility that he would try to take the place of Tun Razak. You see, so Tun Razak was not happy about that, and the action taken was a way of trying to discredit him. I myself did not believe it. I didn't believe about his stealing money, etc. At that time, I was still very supportive of him, and I thought that we should forget about the case because this was political, and it is within the power of the Prime Minister to downplay it and even to get rid of the case. So when Hussein appointed me as his deputy, I thought that the deputy would have a very strong say in the government. So I thought he would listen to me. So I went to his office to tell him to drop the case against Dato Harun. He was furious. He opened the safe, pulled out the file, banged the file on the table, and told me that, look at this, look at this. I'm going to see him in jail. That's what he said. He was very, very angry. After that, I decided I wouldn't mention Dato Harun again to him.
Of course, the case started with Tun Razak, was carried over by Tun Hussein. Why do you think Tun Hussein had such a strong feeling against Dato Harun at the time?
I suppose he must have listened to Tun Razak condemning your father, but I must admit, I don't know how, accepting that, Tun Hussein is related to Tun Razak. And he was appointed because of this closeness. Because as you know, Hussein left UMNO and went to study law in England. But when he came back, he was accepted into UMNO. And UMNO leaders were not quite happy that he should have such a prominent role. And they were quite disappointed when Tun Razak appointed him as a deputy in place of Dr. Ismail. I myself thought that it should be Harun. But of course, that was my view. I was, by that time, I was a member of the Magistrate Tinggi UMNO.
Okay, yeah, I think you mentioned that in your memoir as well, that you thought maybe Dato Harun would have made a better deputy at the time. So unfortunately, after he was charged in court, was found to be guilty, and in his diaries, he details each day, the day of the case, the people surrounding, bringing all kinds of news and offers and things. So quite powerful to read, because obviously he was trained as a lawyer himself. So he thought on legal grounds, definitely he should have won. But of course, as you say, there was a lot of political involvement, which made it difficult. I think important to note as well that before the charges started, that he was offered a place to represent Malaysia in the United Nations as a trade-off. Yes. If he agreed not to continue again in politics. So that adds, I suppose, to the political element of things at the time. Yeah. So then he was charged. There was quite a big incident at his house before he went to jail, kind of around 1978. Were you aware of what was happening at the time? I think there was like a siege near, it was in Jalan Langgak Duta. I don't know whether you heard about anything at the time.
Well, what I knew about was that the Sultan was not happy about the action taken against Harun. Harun had the Sultan's support. So Hussein was finding difficulty carrying out this thing. So Hussein actually went to the Istana to talk to the Sultan. And apparently he was able to convince the Sultan that action must be taken against Dato Harun. And of course, the UMNO youth demonstrated at that time. But in the end, things quietened down.
Yeah, so I think from from the information that I got from my own father, my uncles and things, I think my grandfather wasn't, he didn't want there to be a scuffle and a fight over it. He himself was happy to go to jail, but the Pemuda UMNO Exco are the ones who took action to hold him there, because they found that it was unfair that they released the warrant really quickly to get him into jail. And as far as my uncles and father were concerned, they thought there was going to be a shootout in the compound, because there were people kind of surrounding the house, getting ready to storm the house. I think in the end, my grandfather basically snuck out in the middle of the night in disguise and surrendered himself after negotiation with Tun Hanif. On that time, he wasn't Tun yet, but he was the IGP, and agreed to go to HKL, and then from HKL, he surrendered himself to Pudu jail. So in jail itself, the politics also didn't seem to stop. Lots of people came, various offers and news about pardon and whatnot. So he was offered by a number of parties again, if he agreed to sign a document to say he would stay out of politics, then they would try harder to get him pardoned. And obviously, that took a number of years, and in the end, of course, yourself was involved in getting the pardon signed off. But do you think whilst he was in jail, personally for you and maybe your other colleagues and peers, that it eliminated a potential rival in terms of the hierarchy of things? Because
No,
there was
not for me. I was very low in the hierarchy. So I didn't place myself as any contender against him, or certainly not against Raza. I was still coming from I was leader in Kedah mainly, but I was also involved in UMNO Youth. I was UMNO Youth leader in Kedah, and I suppose uh, I didn't even bother to contest for leadership of UMNO Youth because they decided, I think, on side Jafar Alba.
Jafar Alba.
Yeah, I thought he was unsuitable because he was quite old, you see. But nevertheless, he was chosen, and for some reason, Jafar Alba didn't like me. When I became Deputy Prime Minister, he was went all out trying to well, condemn me.
Yeah, so I'm more talking about in the period he was in jail leading up. I think there was the UMNO election in 1980 or 81. So my reading of history, which, you know, reading of history is always a very subjective thing, was that because he was in jail, then because my grandfather was in jail, then technically for everyone else who was active politically, it eliminated a strong contender for various posts. Do you feel kind of the same as well?
I don't see him as in any way as a contender for my position, because in 1981 I was already well, I didn't get the leadership yet, but I was deputy president to Hussein. So in 1981 I became prime minister. I didn't think of him as challenging me.
And what did you think?
Until anyway.
Yeah, and what do you think when he stood for the vice presidency spot from jail? Were you surprised?
Well, I was a bit surprised. Yeah, but I didn't feel threatened.
Okay. You did. Was it possible for him to stand for deputy or president at the time, or because in his diaries he wrote that he was considering more out of frustration than anything else. Yeah.
I don't remember much about his contesting. All I
Okay.
knew was at that time he was in jail, and I was became the prime minister. And as you know, I never really felt that he was guilty. So I thought that since I was prime minister and Hussein was no longer involved, so I thought Hussein would be very unhappy with me, but nevertheless, I took action to get him released.
Okay. And obviously, as his grandson, I'm grateful that you took that action. I think, well, for me, when I was doing the research, and obviously, personally growing up, and even in the diaries itself, when he mentions you, it's not always in a positive light. He was in jail at the time. But I think looking back on history, and the fact that you put in black and white that you thought the initial case was political, and then when you became prime minister, you acted to get him pardoned. I think that should be a plus. So, you know, for me personally, I'm thankful that you did that. Obviously, once he got out of jail, he had a vice president post. Did that pose any problems for you politically, that you had a vice president who was before that was sitting in jail? Was that a problem?
No problem to me. I can get along with most people, and I never thought of him as being guilty. I thought that he was unfairly treated. But later on, of course, for reasons which I couldn't understand, he was very much against me. In fact, during the contest for election of president between me and Tunku Abdul Rahman, he supported Tunku Abdul Rahman.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about that as well. Obviously, in my family's point of view of things, there is a kind of understanding that because I think after he was released, there was a general election as well, and my grandfather was put in charge of Selangor as well, and I think he did quite well in Selangor at the time. So whether as a kind of I don't know what the right word is, reward or something, he would have been given a higher post in the political structure for his work. What would your reply to that be?
No, I don't remember making any promise for higher post. I thought that when I got him released, pardon means, of course, that normally even if you are released, you cannot go into politics. But when you are pardoned, that is a very big step that I took so as to enable him to be active in politics again. And beyond that, I didn't make any promise.
Yeah, okay. And I think going back as well, I think my grandfather was involved in putting you kind of back in contact with Tun Razak in some meeting back in the 60s, I think, in your kind of rehabilitation into UMNO. I think there are pictures in some biography as well that someone wrote on your behalf. And after that, of course, when my grandfather supported Tunku Razali, there was a split in UMNO later on.
Yeah.
With Semangat 46 and things like that. I suppose by that time, you know, there was a lot of distance between the both of you. So it's not clear what happened.
Well, I couldn't understand why he was not supportive of me, considering that I was the one responsible for his release and pardon. Then, of course, I feel very disappointed that he didn't support me, that he was making remarks that were very much against me. So when people do that towards me, I just kept quiet because I don't think I should be involved in some debate on issues affecting me. I must admit that at that time, I felt very strong because the support for me was very strong in the party. So much so that when Tunku Razali challenged me, I allowed him to do anything he likes. You see, no bar against his campaigning. He even said that spending 20 million to become prime minister is cheap and things like that. Well, it's up to the members to choose me or to choose him. Because for me, okay, I wasn't a prime minister before. If I lose the position, that's okay by me. But I won by very tiny majority, 42 votes only, out of 2,000 over.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm not that, I'm quite young still. So I feel at that time, in terms of political individuals, that all of you are quite, as individuals, competent in your own right. You know, for yourself, you are a former professional in terms of doctor. People like my grandfather, trained lawyer. Ghazali Shafi'i was quite a strong person in his own right. So I think for me personally, just quite nice to read about that era of Malaysian politics. Is quite interesting to compare to now. So I think we're about approaching the time that you've allotted. I just wanted to ask, or rather say in general, that one of the reasons why I'm doing this is because and I think unfortunately, because of a number of factors, there's a lot of misunderstanding or misperceptions about my grandfather. So one obviously is to do with the May 13th kind of incident. There's all kinds of extremes in terms of view. And of course, ironically enough, it was Tan Chee Kun that wrote an article to defend my grandfather when he was in jail regarding the case and regarding May 13th as well. And then obviously the corruption cases, once you're charged, the stigma against it is difficult to shake off. So often I will hear, kind of offhand remarks that all this kind of political corruption started in his case already, which I think is not fair, especially when you compare to now, the sums that we are talking about now. And then, of course, thirdly is the pardon itself, which I think is fair enough, which went quite a long way to kind of clearing his name. But obviously, once the damage is done, it's difficult to reverse. So do you have any kind of closing remarks or just general memories about Dato Harun before we close?
Well, from the very beginning, when he became prominent among youth, I thought that he had a great future ahead of him. But I believe that he annoyed some people who are in a very high position, and he took some wrong steps. You see, to rise, you have to be very careful about how you deal with people above you. If you challenge people above you, they are going to take action against you. So even if you have ambition, it is good not to stress your ambition so much. You see, I see a number of people who want to be prime minister, and they make a show of this, and they have never become prime ministers. I actually, I must confess that I never thought I would be prime minister. For me, the reason why I became prime minister is because two people died. Two people died. One is Tun Dr Ismail, and the other one was Tun Razak. And of course, later on, Hussein also was sick. But these people died, creating a vacancy. At that time, I never thought I could rise to that level, because I thought they were going to be there for a long time. Tunku was there for 13 years. Tun Razak would look healthy initially, but it turned out that he was not well. And then Hussein took over. Hussein also was not healthy, so he decided to retire. So it's not a question of struggling and doing all kinds of gymnastics to try and become prime minister. Circumstances happen which are not planned by you. Of course, in the good old days, they probably assassinate the people who are ahead of them. But I don't have to do that. I don't have to do that. But Tun Ismail died, and Hussein took over from him. And then Tun Razak died. And Tun Razak actually, well, he has a good relation with me. And he told Hussein, this Hussein told me, when Tun Razak was ill and in England, I went to see Hussein because I was going on a holiday to Indonesia. But I told him also that not too many people should be going to see Tun Razak because he's ill. Because a whole jingbang of people wanted to go and see him and disturb him. I said, don't disturb him. When I said that, Hussein told me that Tun Razak says that if he is in trouble, to call me. Now, I am a very junior minister at that time. Yet, Hussein was told by Razak to, because I did help Razak to handle the student demonstration. I told Razak that you leave this thing to me, I will handle it. And you know, I introduced Auku and all that, and all the students hated me, but I was able to stop all this demonstration, mainly because the Auku was simply because I find that this involved Malay students, and Malay students need to focus on their studies. They're not the best students. And also, when they are in the university, they're spending other people's money. And you should respect other people. They give you a chance for you to study. You should be studying, not playing politics. That was my view. So I introduced AUKU and I put a stop to student demonstration. For that, I think Tun Razak thought that I was quite able to handle crisis.
Yeah, and I think my grandfather shared your passion for young people as well, because in his administration for the state, obviously he came up with PKNS, with Yayasan Selangor. He was heavily involved in sports, football especially at the time. So I think from a state perspective, he did a lot of great things, and I hope in the future he'll be remembered, especially for those really substantial achievements in developing Selangor, Kuala Lumpur, and as a whole Malaysia at the time. So thank you very much, Tun Dr Mahathir, for your time. I had permission from my father and his brothers to express that, you know, obviously things were complicated in the past, and you know, it's always good to let all these kinds of things go, because ultimately, you know, it's short life and we're all Muslims, and it's not that important to hold grudges. So I hope at least you can forgive my grandfather for any shortcomings, and hopefully on my part we won't have to continue any grudges down the generations. My father is Tan Sri Azman, his youngest son, to do with the Holiday Villa group. So yeah, that would be my closing statement. Thank you for your time and all the best to you. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.